אני מבקש להזמין לכאן, אנחנו פותחים את הפאנל, את המושב המשפטי, ואני מבקש להזמין את בריגדיר גנרל תומאס איירס מהפרקליטות הצבאית של ארצות הברית. בבקשה.
Thank you very much. I want to first thank the INSS and ICRC for the opportunity to come and speak to everybody here today. For those who don't realize, we're going into the afternoon on the legal perspective. I am a military lawyer, and as a person in uniform then, and as a lawyer, I have to give a disclaimer. And the disclaimer would be that I'll give my personal views and not the views of the United States of America or the Department of Defense necessarily. I hope that doesn't mean that I, am so bland it's not interesting. I also hope it's not so controversial that I make it into the newspaper. So, I bring with me some experiences from my time in Iraq and Afghanistan that are obviously different than the operations here. But I think the things that are the same, some of the things we've talked about and heard about today, asymmetric warfare in urban areas. And when I say asymmetric warfare, what do I mean? I mean people who don't follow the laws of armed conflict, who do not wear uniforms, and they have the weapons and the technology that in prior times were restricted to the state. And in prior times they were so expensive and so hard to maintain that only a state could afford to have them. But now individuals can have that. And then an asymmetric advantage is what they can receive, perhaps. So for a very small outlay, they can have a big strategic impact, either through multiple casualties or through the impact through media or other things. So that to me is asymmetric warfare. And then obviously, as we heard this morning, that so much of our world is much more urbanized. And under the laws of armed conflict, we are not to use urban areas as a base of operations, but certainly that is not adhered to by those we fight, and so we sometimes have to go in and root them out of these areas and obviously abide by the international humanitarian law as we do that. Now, I'd say the international humanitarian law. And I'll say, as President Obama said, we in the military, we certainly try to abide by that. And as President Obama said, when we adhere to international standards, we strengthen those who do, other countries who do, and we isolate those who don't. And certainly that is our hope. And as you know, the United States is not, even as we try to abide by the law of armed conflict, we're not 100% perfect. And we've learned over the last 12 years. I'm reminded of what Winston Churchill said about the United States. He said that the United States always gets to the correct solution, but only after trying every other option first. So we've learned over time, and hopefully we've improved in our operations through time. But much of the criticism that we get, some criticism we get for mistakes that we've made. And changes, and we've changed many of our operations because of the mistakes we made. But some of the criticism we get is because of a view that things are so different now, that this asymmetry I talked about, this asymmetric warfare and urban combat, that we should use a different paradigm, that we should look at a different way to look at warfare. And I would contend that is not correct. Even at the time the IHL was put together after World War II, guerrilla warfare, saboteurs, spies, piracy, all that was known, that was thought about, and the fundamental tenet of the law of armed conflict is that it's based upon obligations, that there are soldiers, you're going to have a war, soldiers in many ways are not rational actors, right? Those we're fighting and ourselves, we're not rational actors. We're going to continue to fight until there is victory or not victory. We're even in the face of unknown odds, we will fight. So that's not really rational behavior. So if you have people who are involved in behavior that's not rational, then you have to put obligations upon them. And that's what the law of armed conflict does. Now, another paradigm could be that you say, well, let's base it upon the rights of those that you're in fight with, human rights law. So let's, as you would in any country, you have police dealing with your own citizens. And under typical human rights law, you're going to use force as a very last resort. Any force should be proportionate. So if a criminal starts to fight back with a policeman can't right away pull out a weapon and shoot that person. There's got to be proportionate responses. Now, the United States is a huge proponent of human rights everywhere, within every country. But we're not a proponent of human rights law as the paradigm by which we should understand and conduct our activities in armed conflict. We should use the law of armed conflict. Because, and I'll talk about just a couple examples why I think that the law of armed conflict and the obligations it puts on soldiers, the clear obligations, sometimes not so clear, sometimes hard to think through, but clear, a paradigm for understanding and thinking about the problems is the right paradigm to use rather than this paradigm of human rights law. So the first example I would think about is a suicide bomber. A suicide bomber, again, not a rational actor. They are trying to get close to a civilian protected place, or perhaps they're in a vehicle, and they were going to blow themselves up. They want to blow up military targets or civilian targets. For a military person trying to respond to that, they put military people in a very difficult situation because military people can't discern, they can't identify who it is that it might be a suicide bomber or it might not be a suicide bomber. So, for instance, we had an instance in Iraq where there was an IED, an improvised explosive device, on the road, on the highway. We quickly put out a checkpoint to try to stop traffic, to protect the civilian population from this IED. And they did not have signs with them, but they put up lights, they put up wire, had soldiers guarding. But a vehicle was speeding towards this improvised explosive device. And so they tried to warn and, in fact, had to shoot the person in the truck. Now, it turned out this truck was actually a contractor. He was a Hungarian contractor. He had earphones on. He couldn't hear the warning shots. He had been drinking in an area, so he wasn't completely able to understand the warnings. And so here you have a civilian killed on the battlefield. But it's because of the operations of those who are not abiding by the law of armed conflict that you're in this situation. Now, can we learn from that? And should we learn from that? Yes. Can we do better to put signs further out? Can we realize that some civilians are not going to be able to react quickly? And so you learn over time and you implement more and more types of warnings and types of procedures for those who can be deterred. But at the same time, you realize you're trying to deter civilians so that you're not killing civilians who are innocent, but you're never going to deter those whose aim is to kill you. And in fact, they're going to continue to think up tactics where they put you in the position where you can't, in their best case, you have no ability to stop them. Right? You have the soldier not only has less than a split second to decide to shoot or not shoot, but the soldier has no decision to shoot or not shoot, and the bomb explodes. And then the other case where you make a mistake and you kill somebody who is innocent. Another vehicle is driving up, and it's a Afghan civilian, an Iraqi civilian, and you kill that person because it's speeding up, it doesn't hear or see the warnings. Well, now you have killed somebody who's innocent, number one, which is bad. But you've also probably made enemies, blood enemies for life, with their family, maybe their whole tribe, maybe their whole clan. And so that's a win-win for the insurgents. So they're not going to change from these tactics. But the soldier who's responding to it, again, as long as he's not concerned about the rights of that individual that's speeding toward him, but he is concerned about the obligations he has to ensure that he doesn't kill civilians, that he minimizes civilian casualty. He only acts in military necessity. He's protecting something that needs to be protected. And so he can go through that calculus. It doesn't matter to him whether he likes or doesn't like the people in the area where he lives or where he's serving. So then the next example, say a sniper who is in a building and shoots. You know, as that sniper shoots, and there are many windows, the soldiers at first don't see which window it's from. Can they spray the building indiscriminately? Absolutely not. They have to have discrimination. They have to identify the target. Again, identification, discrimination, and then deterrence are the topics that I'm talking about. So they have to identify the target first, so that they minimize the potential for civilian casualties. You can't just spray the entire building. Now, once they identify the window, and then they have to decide, is the fire that I'm receiving, is it effective fire or not? Are people really in danger? Can I pull back? Or do I have to press home the attack towards this sniper? And again, what we've learned over the years, even as you do that, it's sometimes better to wait, to not engage, because it may be that they're like a matador, waving the red flag. They're trying to get us to chase towards them. They're trying to get us to incur civilian casualties so that a number of new insurgents and new families are dead set against our behaviors. And I know this is the discussion we had today about hearts and minds. And for us in insurgency, that's very, very important. I know it's somewhat different here, obviously, and there is a thought that maybe you could never win hearts and minds, but I think even if you can't win the hearts and minds, there is a different issue and calculus about whether you make enemies for generations by activities. So then I get to a third example. That example of someone with a rocket. And let me just back one step up for the sniper. You know, one thing about the sniper, under the human rights law, a person, again, if you're looking at it, the response to a sniper, let's say that this unit determines there's no other people in this building, so the unit would use typical military tactics. And they would, one squad would fire, put down a base of fire to cover the other squad as it moves. They would leapfrog towards the sniper. They would probably use thousands of rounds to engage that sniper, right? And if you look at that as a policeman, would that be reasonable in any court? And they would say, no, you're using that. That's not a proportionate response. That is not the least a force that you can use. But again, that's not what's required under the international humanitarian law. And in fact, I know in Colombia, there have been Colombian soldiers who were held to their own human rights law standard within their country, and they've been indicted for responding to snipers in just that kind of situation. And so, because it's not seen as a proportionate response. But for soldiers fighting other people who are not rational actors, we have no desire to get in a fair fight. We don't want a proportionate response. You want to make sure that you engage and kill that sniper and without any casualties to yourself. Again, it may be violent, but hopefully it's quick, it's violent, and it's done, and one side's the winner and one side's the loser. And so the IHL allows for that at the same time while you're minimizing casualties, where human rights law may not allow for that. And so then my third and final example would be someone who is rocketing. And I'll just talk about a very specific example. Early on in Afghanistan, we had operations. We had small fire bases, and these fire bases were getting rocketed quite a bit. One of the ways that they were being rocketed was they'd receive a rocket about 10 o'clock in the morning. And what they discovered was, it's kind of a prelude to how ingenious and creative these people can be to try to kill us. They sit around all day trying to figure out how to kill us. They would freeze a water bottle. They'd cut off the top and the bottom of the water bottle, and then they'd have weighted pieces of metal, and then they'd set it in the sun. When the sun came out, the ice would melt. The pieces of metal would eventually touch. That would complete the circuit that would go to a rocket that would go into the camp. And of course, later they would use garage door openers and washing machine timers and two-way phones and everything else to set off IEDs or rockets. But this was the method at this part of Afghanistan this time. So a squad was going out in the middle of the night to find these guys who were doing this. As that squad went out, 2 o'clock in the morning, they think they see 3 or 4 guys. They're digging. And as they see them digging, they call back to the base and they said, hey, we have 3 or 4 guys. They're digging. They're in a wadi, in a ravine that we've received rocket fire from before. These have to be the guys that we've received rocket fire from before. We want permission to engage. We think we have identified them as the bad guys. And the person back at the base said, well, do you see any weapons on their back? I said, no, we don't see any weapons. Well, try to get a little closer. So they get a little closer now, and they said, hey, we still don't see weapons, but we want permission to engage. And the person at the fire base says, well, do you see any weapons? They said, no, we don't see any weapons. Now, that person at the base, the leader with a little bit more, not in the heat of the moment right there, to put the best rationale on his thinking, is thinking these may be people who were paid. They were forced to go out and do that in some way. They were forced, but their families were put at risk, or they were paid, and they're just, they're less than foot soldiers. And so we don't want to kill them because, again, we'll make more enemies in this insurgency where we're winning hearts and minds. Another thought may be, well, we want to if they don't have weapons, let's capture them. Let's gather the intel. We don't really need the foot soldiers. We need the next level of leadership. We need to take out a whole network of these terrorists, not these guys. So that might have been the thinking of both those things. But the decision was try to get a little closer. So they tried to get a little closer, and as they got a little closer, the bad guys got off 2 shots, and 2 shots to a soldier, Sergeant Stephen Checo, who was 21 years old, from Brooklyn, New York, a beloved son, a brother to a beloved sister. And so you have these losses in war. And in Iraq, we had over 4,000 U.S. casualties, and in Afghanistan we had 3,000, up to almost 3,000 U.S. casualties at this point. So we are going to suffer casualties when you are in these type of operations. Now, what I would say is I have been here the last few days. Again, the international humanitarian law continues to have, even in that situation, it has the right framework to think about it in my mind, in my opinion. Because when that rocket that is aimed at the base, it is not the same calculus of military necessity that maybe you face here. Because in that situation, the rocket's not going to go off for hours. The scenario that we saw here earlier. And then who is receiving the rocket is soldiers. And so here there may be a different calculus. Here there may be that where a civilian population is being targeted. But again, that factors into the military necessity. What is the military necessity? And then what is the potential for civilian casualties, where you're going to fire to fulfill your obligations under that military necessity, and then the proportionate, the calculus of determining what is the proportionality. And that's not easy, and I'm not saying it is easy. It wasn't easy for that commander to think about, and the aftermath for that commander who made a decision to say, get a little closer, and then one of his own soldiers was killed because of that. That's a hard thing. That's a tough position for anybody to be in, to make those kind of decisions. I'm not saying it is easy, But I am saying that we have a proper paradigm under the international humanitarian law, in my view, to consider these problems. And so I think with that, I see my time is up.
Thank you.